Association. Specifically, we're going to be talking about the recent national anthem protests and the implications they have on players' rights, free speech amendments, free speech in the workplace, and other things that we'll get into later on in the presentation. Just a little bit of background. In August of 2016, during the preseason, 49ers quarterback at the time, Colin Kaepernick, decided not to stand for the national anthem to bring light to issues such as racial injustice, systemic oppression, and also police brutality. And during week 1 of the NFL season, a few other players followed suit. There are 11 players around the league who also joined in the protests. Following that, when we fast forward to the 2017 season, during week 3, we see President Trump. He had a rally in Huntsville, Alabama, where he said that any player who knelt during the national anthem should be fired from their position. And this really reignited the issue, which had since waned pretty much, and it found its way out of the limelight. And over 200 players following those comments participated in the protest as well. And then this is where we see the NFL Players Association becoming involved. And they made a statement in October in support of players' constitutional rights. And the NFL responded a couple days later saying that they're working with the NFLPA to sort out these issues. And if we fast forward to this year in May, there was a new policy implemented where the NFL said that if any player, any player that was on the field had to be standing during the national anthem, and if you chose not to participate, you had to be in the locker room. So in response to that, the NFLPA filed a grievance with the NFL, challenging that new policy. And then another statement was released, a joint statement between the NFL and the NFLPA, stating again that they're working on the issue. So you can see there's a very back and forth nature to this, and there wasn't, at least to this point, they haven't been able to find any common ground. So I'm going to pass it off to Andrew, and he's going to talk about a little bit more about the NFLPA and their governing tenets.
Thank you. So yeah, what exactly is the NFL Players Association, and what does it do, and where does it come from? So it was originally founded in 1956, but it wasn't until the 1970s merger between the American Football League and the National Football League did it really start to develop a growing influence in negotiations between players and owners. So once the merger occurred, it was followed by a series of lawsuits the NFLPA brought against the NFL, claiming that they were in breach, that they were violating antitrust laws. And the NFLPA was victorious, and it resulted in the creation of free agency for the athletes, which it gives them more freedom to maneuver around teams and less restrictions, and it's one of the more sought after things that they were looking for after the merger. So the first collective bargaining agreement was negotiated and signed in 1993, and the two main provisions that it called for were, one, just a general conducting of negotiations in good faith, and number two, always having representatives present for those negotiations. And the core governing tenets. So all professional sports leagues have an NFLPA equivalent, but with one very significant difference, and that is the NFL is the only professional sports league that does not guarantee player contracts. And what does that exactly mean? It means when you hear a headline about an athlete signing a deal worth $50 million, there's a good chance that they won't get anywhere close to that amount of money. And so why is this important? Well, it puts them in a somewhat precarious position when they're trying to negotiate for better working conditions or better rights, the same types of things that any other labor organization would advocate for. And there's a particular section in that collective bargaining agreement, Article 26, Section 9, which allows teams to keep deferred payments such as performance bonuses or other incentives in escrow. And this is important because teams have caps on how much they're allowed to spend on players' salaries, and it also gives the owners more a better way of managing cash flows and opening additional cap space to acquire more expensive athletes. Importantly, this doesn't actually prevent owners from guaranteeing contracts. They just sort of decided that they're not going to do that. So The NFL is not immune to controversy. A couple of years ago, I think it's 2005, it came out that a cognitive neuroscientist was doing studies on NFL players who had committed suicide or were suffering from major depression and anxiety, and found strong and consistent evidence of chronic traumatic encephalopathy in their brains as a result of repeated blows to the head from their time in football. The NFL did its best to try and hide the research and avoid paying out lawsuits, but eventually the NFL owners and the Players Association worked together to introduce new player safety rules, making it illegal to lead into those tackles and sort of trying to address these player safety issues. So they do have a history of being able to resolve internal disputes, and so we're hoping to see something similar in the issues around Colin Kaepernick and with free speech. And now Carnita will take it from here.
Right, so the key research components that we're going to talk about in our presentation revolve around free speech, and in reference to that, just how much does the First Amendment actually influence the decision for what is going on presently? Dispute, is there a universal policy that has been put in place that kind of specifies specifically how players should conduct themselves? Team policy, can a team's policy enforce and dictate employers to conduct themselves in a certain way? And also social discord, what do the fans think? How have these issues affected viewership, and as well, how does that affect the overall bottom line? So in reference to free speech, so free speech basically gives us all rights, of course, in order to say our own opinions and express them openly, as well as follow the religion of our choosing without enforcement and interference by the government. So in reference to that, however, we know that there are a lot of situations where expressing our own individual opinions leads to major consequences and repercussions from that. And the NFL has always kind of had a double standard as it relates to freedom of speech. A situation that talks about that revolves around a certain player with the Chicago Bears. He was actually fined because he decided to wear green shoes in order of mental health awareness, and he actually does suffer from borderline personality disorder. So the policy on standing during the anthem actually varies depending on what league is actually talking about that specific policy. So in the NBA and the WNBA, their policy states that all coaches, players, and trainers need to be standing up in a line during the national anthem in a dignified posture. But in the MLB and NASCAR, they have no formal written policy. In reference to the NHL, the only policy that they have about the national anthem is that it needs to be played in the beginning of the game. And then for the Major League of Soccer, they encourage players to stand, but there is no requirement to stand. So there have been a lot of outspoken advocates with opposing opinions on this issue. Of course, Colin Kaepernick is one of them, but in addition to him, Alejandro Villanueva, a player for the Pittsburgh Steelers, was the only player standing in support of standing during the national anthem, while the remaining players on his team opted to stay in the locker room for a specific game. So now I'll give the floor to Rob. He's going to talk about the team policy and social discord components.
Great, thank you, Carnita. So as Carnita just spoke about, there are a lot of issues coming down on each side of this. There are a lot of very, very passionate people. So teams thought that they'd get ahead of this and make their own policy. In Dallas, owner Jerry Jones of the Cowboys has been very vocal and very clear about this. He said in an interview in 2017 with Sports Radio, quote, "If we disrespect the flag, we will not play, period." So, understandably, he is basically saying all his players need to be standing on the field, on the line, for the national anthem. Managers have hinted for the Cowboys that if players don't follow this, they'll be cut, they'll be suspended, or even cut from the team. Other teams have been a little bit more quiet and subtle in introducing their policies, including the Miami Dolphins. They recently amended their team discipline code to include proper anthem conduct, which states that players who kneel or sit during the anthem will be suspended or fined. It doesn't mention them being cut though. So So, all right, just to go over quickly the ideas on social impact. There have been many polls taken over the past couple of years since this started. 32% of people in 2016 who responded to a Rasmussen poll have said that they would view the league less favorably. Viewership between 2016 and 2017 dropped 9.6%. And a recent poll said 31% of respondents view the league less favorably. Now I'm going to pass it on to Nate, who will talk about stakeholder involvement and wrap us up.
Thank you, appreciate it. So just touching upon the confluence of different interests impacting each group and dictating each response within the stakeholder groups. First, we'll touch upon the corporate side of things. There are 6 different corporate sponsors that have taken positions on this topic. And then also notably 23 companies that have actually not held a position on the topic. So we will look at one of the 6 in the interest of time, where Colin Kaepernick, obviously you guys have heard it in the news lately, who has actually come out with a commercial, which we have here, but unfortunately I think we won't be able to have time to view it. It is an awesome commercial, and I'll send it out to you guys if you'd like to see that later. The next stakeholder group is the political grouping in America. There are 2 polar opposite examples here of how politicians have been able to tie in employee-employer relationships into their platforms. First is Donald Trump, where he is essentially saying that he's holding a really deleterious view of what the NFL was doing and also what the players were doing. And then you also have a person running for a representative, a U.S. congressman running for Senate in Texas, Beto Rabuch, who has a very poignant way of explaining things, but unfortunately we don't have time to get to that. And I will send out that video to you guys if you would like to watch that. The last section is the organizational employee-employer relationships. And obviously NFLPA is representing many players, both present players, 2,166, and also representing past players, 3,130. When researching the case, we'll be able to tap into different networks in order to get new lore on each position, whether that position is within current players in the league as well as past players. And then the organizational access is what I just spoke about. Sorry, we switched on slides last second. So then the organizational focus is essentially making sure that we are able to deal with a decision case and write out a set of prescriptions to help the NFLPA better deal with the employee-employer dispute. So thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
One question.
Okay, fine. So maybe it was last night or earlier today, Richard Sherman came out with a comment saying he didn't believe that the CBA would be agreed upon again. Figures once the contract's out, there's going to be another lockout. And I guess, how do you see the contracts that Nike and the NFL currently have playing into that decision making from both sides?
The contracts between Nike and the
NFL.
Well, I mean, the contract is, it's $1 billion and over 8 years that Nike has right now to support the uniforms. Is that what you're getting at?
But if there is a lockout, if there is if they aren't playing, how is that going to affect the contract that the NFL currently has, and how will that be looked at from a liability standpoint for the Players Association?
I mean, we'd have to look at the contract and see what's in there. I'm not in law school, so I don't particularly know, but I can tell you that Richard Sherman does have a reputation for being combative and confrontational with the NFL, and there's no compunction with expressing his true emotions in interviews, and for him to say something like that and threaten a lockout is not surprising to me at all. But there are, a couple thousand other players in the league right now that would be probably more inclined to reach a more favorable updated CBA with the league.
Yeah, I think it's a definite conflict of interest just regarding the contract between Nike and the NFL. But at the end of the day, Nike in itself is its own organization, and their views or their stances don't necessarily have to align with that of the NFL. So if they're currently under contract, all they have to do is get them uniforms, and that's it. They don't owe the NFL anything else.
And Nike came out with a statement saying, and I quote, Nike supports athletes and their right of freedom of expression on issues that are of great importance to our society. So obviously they're there with the athletes, but they're also there to market. So they probably do what is in their best interest. In that case.
Great job.